My name's Karl Colyer and I'm a beekeeper and I'm addicted to it. I've been suffering from beekeeping since 2003 and I admit to continuing to enjoy a variety of bees and environments. And unfortunately, I acknowledge that beekeeping will be part of my life for many years to come. I didn't realize just how interesting beekeeping could be. In those early days, I just thought it was somewhere to relax, something to do, and a bit of fun. And I had chickens and ducks and geese and cats and dogs in the back garden. And we had foxes and pheasants and badgers visiting. But the bees just became absolutely awe-inspiring. And I hope some of you can enjoy that. This is down in my back garden on a nice day. This wasn't in the winter. You can sort of see a bit of a motley crew of bits and pieces. Please notice colour. If you get a local paint shop and they offer remnants of paint colours for £1 per 5 litres, well, buy it quickly, particularly if I live close to you, because I'll be doing that. But I have a variety of hive types, and I'll talk through that. And I've done all sorts of things, but this is roughly where I'm coming from. I've had up to 70 odd hives. I've had as little as, obviously, when I was early doors, 2 or 3. I aim eventually to build up to around about 300 or so. So a bit of a confession there. First things that I wish I'd learned much earlier: if you have a local beekeeping association or any other group of beekeepers, try to join them. It's an absolute godsend. I tend to be quite introverted myself. I don't mind meeting people one-to-one, but what I found is that going to these beekeeping meetings, there's always stuff to learn. I live in Cheshire and there are 5 branches. The other one, which is the branch I'm in, is actually on the other side of this page. But what I would do each year, and I've been doing this for a few years now, is mark down all the ones that I want to go to where I think there's some learning for me. Bearing in mind, I don't really want to go to all 60 meetings each year. But in 2019, I went to 21. 2020 was an odd year last year. Had 22 marked up, and there's a lot to learn. My learning point from all of this is that I used to just absorb everything, and it was great, really, really good. Obviously, once you've been to 20 or 30 or 60 of these, it can almost become overwhelming. So what I tried to do at each meeting was try to have 3 takeaway items that I could give a go, or investigate a bit further, or just consider in my future beekeeping plans. But step number 1, I wish I'd got more actively involved in my local BKA earlier. Perhaps I'm spoiled. Cheshire beekeepers are a really nice bunch. And more recently, the BIBBA membership has meant some really good specialist insights into beekeeping that I just wasn't aware of, just as an ordinary individual in my back garden. Some of you may be surprised by this, but different beekeepers have different opinions, and it is true. What I love is finding people with different opinions, particularly when they're opposite, and introducing them to each other and allowing the conversations to start. And at that stage, I just take a step back. Now, they will both go and explain how their method is right. And the chances are they are both right, because right is just a way of doing it that works, and both methods work. But sometimes you will get pulled aside afterwards and told that the other person's method isn't as good as theirs. And from time to time, 2 people having a debate will pull me to one side afterwards and each explain that. But understand that beekeeping is like peeling oranges or tying shoelaces. People have different knacks. They sort of do it the way they do it, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's right for you. However, there's always stuff to learn. Top tip, in those early days and even later on, decide on what sort of hive you want and try to stick to it. Here I've got Langstroths. There's some Nationals, another Langstroth. You can see I have adapter plates between them here to convert Langstroths to Nationals. I've got modified Nationals somewhere there. I'll make my own here and here, and here and I use anything from, this is an executive sugar syrup container, which is just an old water container, and these are my top of the range syrup feeders, which is a Nutella jar, and that's courtesy via a local crepe stall at our local artisan market. Now, one of the downsides of having all the different types of hives is you get into a nightmare with frames and just trying to have any kind of consistency. If I want to add a super on top of a Langstroth, then I need either a Langstroth one or to have a funny little adapter plate because it doesn't fit with a national, and vice versa. Obviously, commercials, 14 by 12s and all of that. I did try to be clever once and have it so that the Langstroth frames would fit in going that way, and then the national frames would fit in going that way. And that was really good, other than the different heights. And then I ended up having special heights, and I was off up down another rabbit hole. So whatever type you want, it doesn't matter what type you have, whether it's wood or polystyrene or top bar or even a drilled out old tree trunk, that's absolutely fine. But whatever you do, try to stick with it. Otherwise, you will end up with a big problem on interchangeability. And I would recommend not mixing. I'm still trying to untangle all of this, and that's 17 years later. Okay. These are the sort of hives that I settled on that I make myself. I know poly hives are meant to be better insulated. I sort of have an opinion, rightly or wrongly, that wooden ones look nicer. I actually make mine from scaffold planks, so you can see the sort of thickness of the wood. It's 36 millimeters thick. So I end up with the sort of the insulation that I would hope to get from a poly hive and the looks I hope to get from a wooden hive. Just a small tip as well. You can start to see my floor is here. If I turn my floor upside down, it makes a crown board. That's nice and simple, because then I don't have to fuss about what's a crown board and what's a floor. And similarly, here's my brew box, which is a standard sort of deep brew box. And here's my super, which is also a brew box. I've actually ditched pretty much all my supers. And that way, if I just take these brood box type things with me, I can either make more brood boxes, more hives, more colonies, or I can just bung them on as supers. And I learned this one just from somebody, and I might mention the name later on, that said just occasionally put a brood box above a queen excluder so that it can draw out the foundation into nice straight comb, better than they can do on an actual brood box when they're scurrying around all over the foundation all day long. And I started doing that, and it worked really well. So I started doing more, then started questioning, why have I got supers? And here I am. I do make my own hives because it's much, much cheaper. Here's just in my workshop. This is a winter. You can see it's dark outside, as winters are. But me trying to make my first WBC hive, and these are all bits of pallet wood, and that's just normal. If I blow a blowtorch over it, it sort of looks nice and bring the grain out. If I paint it, it looks fairly traditional. And again, this is pallet wood. So total cost of this one was around about £10 to make. That's just the outer shell. Now, one of the things I did with my WBC, having looked at the WBCs from William Broughton Carr, his ones had a slightly narrower version of a national hive in there. Never quite understood that one, but yeah, sorry, Mr. WBC, but I've actually made these so they're a little bit wider, so a straightforward national hive just plops straight inside. So I can have national hives in any sort of condition and then put one of these over the top and it looks lovely. Okay, so this is what you can do if you're practically minded. Now, you don't need to be practically minded to be beekeeper, but when you do, the costs absolutely plummet down. To give you an idea as well, something I learned, I didn't realize how expensive frames were. It's okay, a frame is £1 and foundations a pound. But here's some frames that I made, and this slot here cost me about £1 to make, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And here's one of my mating nukes. I talked about the executive Nutella jar with a few little holes drilled in the bottom. And here's another box, a sort of nuke box. This one's got 5 in, this one's just got 3. These are really good for doing quite quick production on mating nukes. Now, you may ask, why do I choose 3 or why do I choose 5? And it's really sophisticated answer is it depends on the size of the plank that's available. Okay, it is literally as simple as that. If you're making it from bits of pallet, that's a width of one of the slats, and that's 2 bits of slat and so on. So away you go. My only recommendation is make sure that the frames that you use are all interchangeable. Otherwise, again, a bit of a nightmare. Okay, here's a typical frame that I make myself. Now, one of the questions I learned, like I said, how much is a frame? Well, it's £1 for the frame, pound for the foundation. Now, that's okay, and it's not a problem for most beekeepers. When I talked about trying to get to 300 colonies, though, and each would have a brood box and 2 supers on, and so roughly speaking, that's 33 odd frames in a hive times 300 is 10,000 frames. Now, I've either got to spend £20,000 on frames or foundations, or if I go this route, it's got a bit of nailing to do anyway, whatever sort of frame you got. They're costing about 2p each. So I either had to present myself with a £20,000 bill or a £200 bill to get 10,000 frames. Sounds weird, but actually it's quite simple to do. All of this wood is from pallets. Okay, so this is a piece of pallet wood which from here across to here is about 100 millimeters thick, and I just chop it into 10 or 9mm slivers and end up with those, and the same with the bottom. And then this is just a full length, full width and square piece of pallet wood again. And just I used to screw and glue these, but now I just use a nail and it just goes straight in. Some people use spacers, some people use Hoffmans, other people use castellations. I find these 1/2-inch sort of felt tacks work really well. I have no idea why it's a perfect size, but when you find it's a perfect size, they just slot in really, really easy. And it gives me just a little bit of wriggle room that I don't get with castellated spacers, and the plastic spacers that I can slide on over here end up being 7p each. Doesn't sound much, but it quadruples the cost of a frame. Okay, but you can get creative. Now, let me try to see how we started. This is back in the days when you were allowed to meet with another beekeeper in a pub. And me and a guy called Frank used to meet up, and we had frames, and we wanted to get rid of the cost of the wax foundation. So we looked at what foundation was like, and we noticed that the bees often had little holes at the bottom. Never quite understood why, but it's really good for communicating between frames with the bees and getting the pheromone and the heat to and fro. So rather than pay for the wax, we had a piece of wood initially, then a piece of printed card. Then we realized that this bit around here wasn't necessary, so we took that off. And then we ended up taking that out and just putting some lolly stick on. And then this looks, oh, this was screwed and glued, and this was just nailed. Frame on this one still £1. This funny thing here was 20p. Without the frame around the outside, it just ended up at 60p. With the screws and glues, it ended up at 12p. Then I met somebody on an instrumental insemination course. He said, "Why are you screwing and gluing? Why don't you just nail it?" And he just decimated the cost of my frames. I wish I'd known this earlier, because this frame is equally as functional as any other frame that I've got. This is what they turn out like. I don't know why, like I said, exactly, but the bees tend to have these holes down at the bottom. It's not me doing it, but you can see it's just ordinary pallet wood. It's nailed together. Probably just see the trace of the nails there, and they form the comb in there as they feel fit. Okay, this one's full of honey, but when they're doing the drawing out the comb for uh, brood, it can be a mixture of worker comb and drone foundation, depending what they see at the time. What I do notice is a lot more drone foundation being made if I allow them to draw out their own comb. And if I've got a colony that I want to reproduce that genetics because they're particularly nice, then one of the aspects is that I'd like more of those drones knocking around. So allowing them to draw out their own comb from scratch means that chances are I'll have a few more drones knocking around the neighborhood and the local drone congregation area. Okay, I don't know if I'm in the way of this or anything. This is just an old graph. It's a bit out of date. I didn't realize just how much queen imports were going into the country. When around about 10, 12 years ago, it was around the 5,000 mark. It's actually bumped over the 20,000 mark now. This is a year or two old when I did this. This is telling us either that beekeeping is becoming incredibly popular or we don't know how to raise our own bees. Now, I don't think there's that many extra beekeepers coming onto the scene, although there is a sort of rejuvenation in interest, but we do seem to have a problem in the UK where queens are being imported. Yeah, it's not all bad. I'm not going to decry it, but it does have its risks. And one of the things I've learned is it really does upset your other colonies when you throw in a different sort of bee into the mix. But I'll talk a bit about that later. For me, and it's learning that's taken quite a long time to sink in. But if you can, try to find some local bees. They're used to your wonderful weather, and I'll show you some pictures of what it's like to be wet in Cheshire. But they're used to the local forage as well. If I were to import bees from somewhere else, I could bring in some sort of Ferrari type bees, and they'll have loads of brood, loads of bees, make loads of honey, but they won't breed true because they haven't got anything like that to mix and mate with. So the following year, I end up with these things called F2 aggression and so on. So trying to avoid bringing new DNA into an area is good for me. It's good for my bees. I also think it's a duty of care with my neighbours as well, because I've seen photographs and experience attacks from bees where somebody's tried to breed nice bees, but they're surrounded by others that are bringing bees in from, if I just say outside the area, probably outside the UK, and they end up with bees that are not defensive, but utterly aggressive to the point where they're stinging through genes and even into wellies. That's quite big learning for me. My ideal bee is one that is nice, and we'll talk about that later. But when I breed from it, it sort of breeds pretty true next generation around. And I know one of the measures of good bees is having water wall brood. And even I guilty as anyone, when you see the sealed brood and it's absolutely covering a frame, it's quite exciting because it's like, you know there's going to be thousands of bees coming out, and a side of sealed brood will make 3 sides of bees once they hatch out. But for me, this is the sort of shape I'm after, where you've got a nice cluster, looks pretty healthy. A few have either hatched out or duds or something. I'd look into that. Around here will be some larvae and pollen, and around here some honey. This for me is the ideal sort of shape. They're not too prolific, and they do produce a surplus, of which, obviously part they consume themselves, but they're actually quite easy to manage. They're unlikely to swarm because they aren't making 10 zillion bees a second. So I can actually leave them alone. I don't feel compelled to have to check them weekly. 2 weeks or 3 weeks is plenty good enough on some of these ones. And I'll talk about how to make that much less frequent as well. But that's, to me, what I've learned over the time. Be modest with what you want from your bees, and your bees will be in balance with the surroundings, and you won't have to keep on trying to look after them as if you're spinning plates all the time. Okay. Now, I do make hives for myself and others, and often the question, I mentor a few people as well. People ask, how many hives do you need? Ideally, I would hope, if you can afford it, to have two. Here's a couple that I'm delivering for somebody. They wanted black roos. Fair enough, no problem at all. And and then I found out it's brilliant because the roofs are the parts that get dirty on these hives, and these always look immaculate. So I'm really, really impressed. I wish I'd learned that earlier. If you can only afford one hive, fair enough. That's how most of us get started. But if you can have a nuke box or some other small version, or even if it's just a spare brew box, that would be good because you've got flexibility then. And for me, the ultimate is to have a couple of hives and a nuke box, and then you've got massive flexibility. There's loads you can do with your beekeeping, and you're not entirely dependent on one hive, one colony getting through every winter. For me, that's like going to a casino, going to the roulette table with £100 of chips and just putting all the chips onto, I don't know, red 35 or something. And if it works, it's fantastic. If it doesn't work, there's nothing. You've got no bees. And I've been without bees once with those bad winters of 2010 or 11 or 8 or something, when it was minus 17. My bees died out through starvation. And now I sort of learned that was partly my fault. But then effectively, I gave up beekeeping for 3/4 of a year until I got my confidence back. So more than one box would be ideal. If you've got two hives and a nuke box, massive flexibility. Now, one of the hardest things I've tried to come to grips with is how to make my beekeeping simple. And I know there's a lot of things about what you should be doing in the apiary, but if I wanted to get to the point where I had 300 colonies, and I'm nowhere near that at the moment, but my thinking is what I would like is for them to overwinter as what would be the normal brew box, and then what would be a super, but for me, that's the same brew box side, and that's pretty much full of honey, no queen excluder. So that would be my overwintering mode. When I come along at the end of April, or sometime during early May, depending on the weather, I would put a queen excluder on, try to get all the brood down below, and have the super up and another super up, and that's it. So in April, I put a box on, and in September, I take a box off and take it home. That's it. It's really, really simple, but I can actually leave the spare super on top if I wish, and all I do is, whereas my crown board is up here, I just move it down and put it in there. And that's overwintering, so I don't even have to move anything. And that works for me. It seems to work for the bees. And during the summer, while I'm trying to get all of the brood down to this bottom box, most of the time it fits, but sometimes there's some spares, so I make a nuke. I try to make one in May, one in June, and one in July from each hive. And that way I'll end up going from one colony up to 4, and then I'll have 3 overwintering or sold or shared, and the original one going through winter. And I should still have a super of honey for the bees, and ideally a super of honey for me. Because mine are brew boxes, these end up weighing around about 40 to 45 pounds per hive. I know the Cheshire average is around about 35 to 40. That's all I would ever really hope or want or expect. You can make more. You can make more all sorts of ways. You could even put another brew box on top of these and have 2 queens operating, and they absolutely can cram this lot, but it gets complicated. This for me is the very simplest way of beekeeping. All I've got to do is queen excluder on, queen excluder off, and super on, super off. So it's a bit like Karate Kid, wax on, wax off, and really, really simple, really, really effective, and it works wonderfully. And the cheat for me is, like I said, having brew boxes and supers the same size. Okay. I'm going to be putting 35 hives onto a farm this spring. We've agreed that. He wants to know when it's going on, and I said, well, the hives will go on in April. The bees will start to go in from sort of third week of May right the way through to July. And he said, how can I get any honey in June? I said, not really. It's a bit tough in the first season. He said, okay, with 35 hives, can I get a few hundred jars of honey by September then? And this is part of the expectation. It's exciting to get to the point of the honey, but I think we need to be quite modest in our expectations from the bees. Year one, get your first colony through the winter. It's a bit of a panic, certainly if you're a beginner beekeeper, but even if you're like me, getting on for 2 decades in, you do a split. They've got to draw out the comb and raise more bees and then produce all of their own food stores ready for the winter. That's quite a task for the bees. In the second season, they'll start to grow out and draw out more wax and everything and start to draw out and fill up the supers, but you may want to get a split and get another colony going. But from year 3 onwards, I think it's good to expect some honey. If you've got some of the more exotic bees, you can have lots of honey, and that's great. If it's a poor year, you can have no honey and even run the risk of starvation. My bees tend to be what I would call locally adapted, or at best they're approaching near native, but they're mongrelized, as most bees in the UK are, but they're okay. So I will get a fairly modest honey haul from my bees in an okay year, but even in a bad year, I tend to get a honey haul. Last year was the very first year that I've ever fed my bees syrup. And I did it because I was rapidly trying to increase the number of bees and also asking them to sort of draw out a load of comb as well. So be modest in your early objectives, and I think that will reward you with some satisfaction and not the disappointment of not having the honey straight away. I used to spend ages trying to find a queen, and I am useless at finding queens. Absolutely useless. It gores me. The only way I can find them is not to look for them. Anyway, it's just one of life's big mysteries. So I've given up looking for the queens. I just look for evidence of a laying queen. And when I open this up, I see all sorts of going on. Got drones, a plague cup, and obviously sealed brood here, but you can't make it out. But there's larvae in here. So I'm happy. And that for me is a great colony. And if you can find the queen and mark her, brilliant. When I can, it's great. I mark her. When I can't, yeah, I've given up. I either lose the queen or the will to live, and it's just one of my foibles. I've no idea. It's embarrassing sometimes, particularly when other people point it out. There's the queen. Yeah, thanks. One of the things that I've learned as well is not to have a diary to say that I'm doing this next Saturday and this the following Tuesday, because the weather always plays a part. If it's sunny, then go and do the inspections, the swarm management, splits, honey extraction, and so on. You don't have to wait until the end of the season to do your honey extraction. I take the honey out 4 frames at a time from a super and put them into a tangential extractor, and so I can actually just extract 4 frames from a hive, and that's plenty. I might extract eight, and that's getting on for a whole super. I actually do the extraction at the apiary next to the bees, and people say, don't you get smothered in bees? Well, not really. You give them one single sharp shake, that gets pretty much all the bees off. A piece of grass will brush the rest off. I quickly decap just by scraping down with one of those fork tools and into the extractor, and then I hand whir it for a few minutes and turn it over and so on. Then it goes back into the beehive, and the bees then are just completely infatuated with fixing all of the honey that's oozing out all over the place, and then I can take more frames out and do the same. It's actually quite easy to extract, say, 8 frames of honey from a hive and do that from 3 or 4 or 5 hives on an apiary on a nice sunny morning, and come back with buckets of honey. On other sunny days, you can be jarring honey at home. I've got my inspection records, which are all electronic now, or I can build frames, and that's just a nice thing to do when I don't have to go out to the bees. In the winter, there's a lot to do. For me, I try to keep it just as busy. I'm making beehives and bits, lots of meetings, lots of learning, and I try to do as much as I can within reason. One of the things I have done with my jobs is split them out. What's a wet job, a dry job, a noisy job, a quiet job, easy job, a hard job, and a small job and a large job. And then if it's a wet day and I've got nothing else on, then I could do a wet, noisy, hard, large job. And that might be, for example, and it can be done, making up 50 brood boxes from planks. So that's doing it all from scratch on a rainy day. There's this geezer. I don't know if any of you have heard of him. Patterson. Yeah, I think that's his name. Anyway, he had this idea and he showed it to me, and I listened to it. And I thought, yeah. But I thought I hadn't tried that before. So literally, on the way back from one of the bee improvement days that he was teaching over in Wales, I thought I'd give it a go. And the next thing you know, you're inundated with new colonies. And if I'm not going to go into queen rearing and breeding and all of that, but choose a method. But let me just explain how simple something can be. So we're looking down, sort of helicopter view, and here's a hive stand, and you've got a colony here in a sort of full-size brood box. And there'll be anywhere from 4 up to about 8 frames of brood in there. And then what you do is you take a couple of frames out, or you can do it with one if you wish, but a couple of frames out and put it into a new box, a couple of frames out, put it into a new box, and then you just shove this all the way up to the other end there. And so there's not many bees in here. There's just the frames that you took off and the adjoining bees. The only trick, ideally, but it doesn't really matter, is if you can have the queen over here, that's fine. If you got over here, again, doesn't really matter. But is to try to have eggs or very young larvae in each of these. It doesn't have to be many; it just has to be some. If you can spot them, it's really easy. What happens immediately is these bees all come flying out and doing what they do with their forage, but they all come back to these ones because that was their original home. And where they were going in the entrance here, now they're sort of splitting off, going between these two. So these fill up in no time at all with bees, bringing back nectar and pollen, and the pheromones disappear, the queen pheromone. So they start then making emergency cells straight away. And you end up quite quickly with 2 more colonies. Ideally, it doesn't work 100% of the time, but once you've got that going, and you can move these off after a week or 2, but you can then put a new box here and a new box here, and put a couple of frames in each one, and then shove this back up this end and just repeat the whole process. It works amazingly well. So have a simple way to make bees. Okay, don't need to find the queen. You don't need to do anything weird. You don't even really need to come back to them. It takes a couple of minutes, and you could end up with a couple of extra colonies. This is the real life version of it. This is the box. This box was up this end, and then what I did was couple of these new boxes. I put one there and one there, and put some frames in, shove this big box up to this end, and then after a while, these nuke boxes grew too big, so I ended up having to put those into full-size brood boxes. And now I'm coming back, and I've got to take some frames out of here and put them in a couple of nukes, some frames out of here, put them in a couple of nukes, and off I go again. So 1 becomes 3, becomes 7. If you do it again, it suddenly becomes something like 13 or 15. And I'm in Cheshire, so the weather's not amazing compared to the more southern and drier parts of the country, but this is incredibly effective to do. And it actually gets even easier when you do some other tricks or do it wrong like I did, and I'll explain that soon as well. I'd also learned about a beekeeper's dozen. If you want a dozen colonies in the spring, then ideally go into winter with 15. So a beekeeper's dozen in October is 15, because by spring, maybe you end up with 12. If you end up with 15, fantastic. If you end up with 12, there's no great surprises there. If I want 12 new colonies, then I might have to do 15 splits, because not all of them work. The queens don't always mate. Or I don't always do it right. Maybe I don't get larvae of the right age. Yeah, that's fair enough. But don't aim for 100%. It just doesn't work. And if I want really nice bees and my queens to be better than the queens I've got, then there is a downside. I'm going to have to raise more queens, and I'm going to have to do some tough love on the queens that don't come up to scratch. Stomping on them is the ultimate way to deal with them, but you can put them to one side and just allow them to raise a bit of brood or draw a bit of comb, but don't breed from them. But if I want better queens, then I can't just expect, if I want 12 really nice queens, to breed 12 queens and they're all nicer. I find roughly half of them are about the same, a quarter of them are worse, a quarter of them are better. But again, that's just law of averages. Okay. Now, doing the splits, I talked about doing splits. Yeah, particularly for blokes. It may sound painful, but it's not. It's actually very easy. Now, the way you do splits as a human being is one leg goes one way, one leg goes the other way, and the rest is up to either sheer determination or being double jointed. What I do is, if I want to split let's say a 11 frame brood box, I just put the even frames into another box, and the odd frames, they stay where they are. Okay, so end up just putting frames 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 into a box. One of these will have the queen on. One nuke box will have the queen on, either this one or the original brood box. It's almost certain that both boxes will have some eggs and larvae on, but you don't have to look doing it this way. These splits like this take around about a minute to do, and when I'm in a rush or doing it quickly, I can walk up to half a dozen hives in an apiary with 12 empty nuke boxes and make 12 nukes up. And from start to finish takes around about half an hour. So could end up with a dozen potential nukes. The original colonies are, as the energy is taken out of them, because I've taken some of the brood and larvae out. But that, again, is one of my methods for swarm prevention. I can't be doing with these weekly checks. So if I see more than 4 frames of brood in a brood box, I'll take the spare ones out and make a nuke with it, or another colony. And that way I don't need to come back and do a swarm check for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. And by the time that time's up, I can come back to see if the nukes have taken or not. And that's nice and easy for me. Okay, but top tip, if you've taken frames out, remember to put some frames back. So I took half of them out, but then put 1 or 2 new frames in, obviously run out. And then if you don't put frames in, this is what happens. It looks lovely, but oops, yeah, there's a bit of a bugger to deal with afterwards. But sometimes I let them carry on and do it just to remind me. But at some point, I have to clean it up. This one here is a couple of ones. I took 2 frames out to make a nuke, and I forgot to put the 2 frames back. And I remembered a couple of days later, and this is what I found. So the bees are doing a fabulous job of naturally drawing out the comb. And what I had to do, unfortunately, was cut this off and put the frames in. And that's just me. Such a shame, but always remember, if you take frames out, to put more frames back in. Okay. But I talked about doing the splits, and I showed you the picture a little while ago of where the Patterson method, where I get nukes and so on. If it's a nice bee flying day, I go to yeah, sorry, yes. So I'll get the brood and queen, take them out of a box, which might have, say, 3 or 4 frames in it of eggs and larvae, maybe some sealed brood, depending on how long the queen's been laying. But what I do now is I leave 1 frame in the box, and then put some new frame and foundation in. And that single frame has got eggs and young larvae on. Lots of the bees are out foraging. But when I come back in 3 or 4 weeks, it's almost certain there's another colony in there. They will have had their emergency impulse to raise a new queen, and the foraging bees and the bees that were there were enough for starting up yet another colony. And all that cost me was 1 frame and nothing else. I took the queen, I took the brood, so I took a viable colony. It's just that I didn't take every single one. So I know it might be quite a lot to take in. What I want to try to do is give you an impression of how easy it can be. You can do larval transfer or grafting, and you can do it by scooping them out, fair enough, or cell punching, which is really useful, or cup kits and genta. Whatever you do, just pick a method that works for you. If your eyes are no good, you're going to struggle. But if your hands are not steady, you're going to struggle. So pick a method that works for you. I've played around with all sorts of different grafting kits. These tend to be my favorite ones. I've even tried bits of squashed up coat hanger. One of the things on the bee improvement days that used to go on with Roger, used to try to help people do grafting. 95% of the people say they can't do it or never done it. And within 10 minutes of getting people to try, around about 95% of them could do it. Okay, so my top tip is you've got to graft about 200 larvae. If you do that, almost inevitably you get good enough at grafting. Now that 200 grafts may sound bad. It's about 2 hours. So just 2 hours of picking larvae out, doing it wrong, smudging them, squashing them, whatever, getting the occasional one right. But by the end of the 2 hours, you're getting most of them right. Okay, and suddenly you're able to graft. And once you're able to graft, it's a bit like being able to ride a bicycle. You can do it forevermore. You don't even think about it. Now, choose something you like about your bees. Ideally, if you're breeding them for good temper, that's good on you and good on your neighbours. I think if you live in a town, it's a duty of care thing. If bees are gentle or calm on the comb, that's great. You don't want them too gentle because they need to defend themselves from wasps. And if you're being a bit of an idiot as a beekeeper and banging them around, they need to give a bit of feedback. I like bees to be able to survive, hardy, resilient. Now, by that, they don't have to be too productive because, to give you an idea, 2 14 by 12s colonies last year, they had exotic bees in them. The bees swarmed twice each during the course of that first season, and had to put 75 kilograms of sugar into the colony to get the bees through the first winter. Admittedly, they looked packed with honey, but they weren't going to survive because every piece of food they got, they turned into bees. So that for me wasn't necessarily hardy or resilient. That was just prolific. If bees are aggressive, then you have to deal with it. The easiest way to deal with it is to squash them. Okay. If you know where your bees came from, then it's good to make more bees and queens. One of the things that I've learned, certainly where I live in Cheshire and I'm a swarm collector and I see other people, is all the bees that I would ever want are around me. But there are other bees around the UK, and some people are willing to share them. And as long as they're from a sort of climate in terms of rainfall and temperature and altitude and everything that's similar to mine, I'll give it a go. It's brilliant. But most of the bees you want are around you, and just have a go at breeding them yourself or sharing them with others. Okay. Slight diversion. What I've learned with bees is they're like tomatoes, actually. These are tomatoes in my sitting room. You can see they're 2 feet tall. This was taken day before yesterday. Okay. These, I overwinter my tomatoes in the same way that I overwinter my bees. Doesn't everyone do it? No. These are tomatoes. I picked the tomatoes in October. And then 5 days later, I planted the seeds, and these are the seeds yesterday. They're not spindly. I'm growing some at the moment. They're spindly from seed, but these are nice, solid plants. And a bit like my making nukes, I get them through the winter, and in the spring, they're absolutely flying compared to ones that I planted in the spring. So if you can learn to overwinter a nuke, you end up with a very strong prospect of having a great colony going into next year. Okay, but I mean peppers. You can't see it here, but I pluck all the leaves off the peppers, and then they all start sprouting back over the winter. And in the first year, I might get 1 or 2 pepper plants. In the same way with my bees, I might get 1 or 2 jars of honey. In the second year, I might get 10 or 15 pepper fruits. And in the third year, it can end up with loads, 40 plus. And it's a bit like 40 jars of honey. And I collect the seeds as well. So I make my own nukes. I overwinter well, and I allow the plant or the colony, whatever, to mature and end up with a good solid crop. But people don't teach you this with peppers or tomatoes, that you can keep a tomato plant going for 2 or 3 years, because it doesn't help. This is a brew box, and I talked about nukes. I've got quite a few nukes, over 100. But if you put a couple of nuke boxes on top of a brew box, they sort of make about the same size, and the bees can go up and down and over the top because that's the crown board. A trick here, Steve Rose in Wales showed it to me. I didn't believe it at first, but gave it a go, and it absolutely worked. Is you put a piece of plastic sheet here, whether it's cling film, I think he used an animal feed bag. As soon as you do that, the queen pheromone from here stops wafting up. So it makes this side seem like it's queenless. The nurse bees can come over and they draw out the queen cells and make a new queen. After 2 or 3 days, you can take the plastic sheet off, and next week you put the plastic sheet here. They'll finish off these queen cells, and then they'll start some more queen cells here, because this side is now queenless, and you can keep this going all through the summer. In the meantime, there's a queen in here producing eggs regularly, so you still get honey crop. All you're doing is simulating queenlessness with a piece of plastic. You can use wood or whatever you wish, but it's the pheromones. When you understand what happens with the bees, you can simulate it, and the bees know what to do from there. It is amazing. It is so simple. You end up getting anything from 5 to 10 sealed queen cells per week once you get going on this, because it takes a full night all in. But it's amazing. These are some of my nuke boxes. I use my nuke boxes 12 months a year. I use them in the spring to do splits, and during the summer to raise them. I double up like this during the summer, then I take the top box off, and that's like another split. And then in the winter, when I narrow down, I allow them to fill up the top with honey, so they overwinter, and that works very, very well. A nuke box can be used all year round, and you end up with new colonies, new comb, reserve colonies, or overwinter colonies. And as someone said, I won't keep quoting Roger, but unfortunately, and I hope he's not listening, but you keep on learning stuff from him, you end up replacing your winter losses before winter comes. And it's magic, absolutely magic. If you end up with too many in the spring, you can obviously share them, give them away, whatever. One of my cheats, my X-ray vision. Here's a couple of new boxes. Yeah, excuse this, but you can see I didn't put this on properly, and you can see it here with an infrared camera. Here's a colony here inside. So it's relatively small, but it's relatively low. It's barely into the upper box of honey. You can't see this one from this angle. You have to go around the other side, but it's here again. A small colony, there's heat at the bottom, and you can see the heat signature at the top. So it tells you you've got colonies that are alive and well, even though this is the same picture, same day, just this is conventional camera, this is a heat sensitive one. So I can do inspections of colonies like this without having to go through the worry of opening them up when there's snow or even if it's raining. I do make nice hives as well because they go in nice places. It's just half a dozen there's me actually. Yeah, I never noticed that. So I think someone took the picture for me. But I can get hives on corporate places. They even put fences around. It's lovely. And you just have to make the hives look nice. Even in stately homes and gardens, this is a private garden. I didn't realize this, but when he said, what color do you want? He explained blue and white. He's a Man City fan, but okay, if that's what you want, yeah, that's what you get. But you can get weird hives as well. This one is built into a pub. This is where the male and female loos are in the sort of vestibule area. So I took the window out, put a double glaze unit in and a new frame, and can't quite figure it out. But these are 6 frames here, 2 frames deep, and this is a nuke that's gone in. I've got a queen excluder type thing here, and up here's the, for want of a better word, the super with a dozen frames up here. And it's great fun being asked to do this because I'm relatively practical. It's good, but this was probably the best observation hive I've ever made because it was observed all the time. People used to come to the pub just to look at the bees and to buy a drink. These are the normal sort of hives I have. Again, brew box, queen excluder, super. Some people like to name their hives. Yeah, if you want to name them and color a picture and that, I'll screw it on, no problem at all. Nice and simple, nice and effective, incredibly versatile. Top tip though, don't put, I talked about the Cheshire weather. If you're going to put hives on a floodplain, make sure you can deal with it. Here's an example from winter before last, and this recent winter, it actually just came up a bit higher. There's actually a cluster of bees in here, and really, really upsetting. But this is what happens because I didn't move them. And there was a reason why I couldn't move them at the time. In fact, it was so cold and so dangerous here that I had to send the wife in to try to rescue it all. I wasn't going to go in there. No. Anyway, don't forget about the drones. You need drones. If you've got drone comb, brilliant. Drone saturation, well, lots of drones is good. If you can trap drones and whatever, if you put a super frame into a brew box, they'll build down below it, a bit like the foundation list. Almost certainly they'll make drone brood. So if you've got a nice colony, that's a really quick and simple way just to get some extra drones. Okay, conscious times going on. Have a go at grafting and punching. Just if you faff with some or knock them, just don't use them. But again, here's a really good trick. If you graft 10 larvae into some cupkip type things, check again after 2 or 6 hours. You see a little trace of wax around the lip. If that little trace of wax around there, they're already starting to accept those larvae and build them out as queen cells. If they're not, then graft again. Okay, in the morning, do it once again. What happens is you graft 10, maybe 5 are drawing out as queen cells. The other 5, you graft those again, and maybe 2 of them are drawing out as queen cell. Of the 3 that were still rejected, graft again, and maybe 2 of those end up drawing out as queen cells, you end up with a 9 out of 10 success rate. Everyone thinks you're really good. All you've done is just had 3 quick hits at it. Amazing. Okay, and these are just queen cells. It's the best bit about beekeeping, just to see the royal jelly and the bees around. I know Miller has a complicated one, and if you're studying for BBKA exams, you have to do it a certain way. I can't be bothered with that. All I do is look to see where the larvae are, and I cut through there. And by default, what I've got is the young eggs and larvae exposed on that edge, which is usually a crescent shape on mine, and I don't have to do any preparation. They'll just start immediately building queen cells from there. So it just happens instantly. But the lump you take off at the bottom, what I do, you can't see this well, it's just a frame, but you put it sideways on, and I lay it over the top of my bars, and they start to draw out more queen cells straight away. So the eggs and larvae that are on this side can actually make a lot more queen cells as well. Not very clear, that one, but conscious. I don't want to use up too much of your time. Someone asked, how long does it take to service a hive? Well, I've worked it out. To do swarm prevention, good solid disease inspection, at least 1 per year. Honey extraction, frame exchanges, hive maintenance, 6 hours per hive per year. For a lot of people, that's a bit of a surprise, but that's what it takes. And one of the reasons I worked this out is because if you've got 300 hives, that's 1,800 hours, which is broadly speaking 40 hours a week for most of the year. But for the first 2 or 3 or 4 hives, each one used to take me 50 plus hours a year. Most of the time I was just staring, absolutely doing nothing, just watching them in amazement, particularly when they're bringing the pollen in. Amazing. Beekeeping as a craft, nearly there, almost gone. I used to work in the automotive sector, and Japanese taught me many, many things, but one of them was this thing to sort of copy or learn, and they used to differentiate between them. And they got a word mozo, which is to copy or reproduce, which is what we would know. But they got utsushi, which is, it's like copying, but the idea is it's from a master or someone that's very well respected, and it's emulating something, or you're inspired by something, or you can attribute to something to a source, or you respect them, and so on. The long and short is here that actually beekeeping is a craft. And I know there's gadgets and widgets and chemicals and things you can do, but if you just read the old ways of doing it from the 1850s, or you watch someone that's been keeping bees for longer than you've been alive, and even I do that now. I have someone that I secretly am a mentee to him, but I haven't told him yet. But he's been keeping bees since 1963, and I'm always learning stuff. Just the really small things. It's almost like, yeah, he knows the craft. And I don't have to wait 55 years to learn that. I can watch him for 55 minutes and pick up some bits and pieces. I've got more to do. I don't like culling my queens. I still need to rationalize my kit, and I need to work with more people locally. Learn how to find queens. That's my Achilles heel, and I must tidy my garage and workshop, and decide on a few query rearing methods and stick with them. It's an important bit, that one. And I'd like to run a bee business on a carbon negative basis, so I'm not using fuels and things, and I will be using instrumental insemination because I will try to help breed the native bee. Okay, so that's me in a nutshell. Just, and I want to share what I do, but also what I get wrong with others, because I think that's half the learning. One final one, become a beekeeping Bruce Lee. Now, I'm not saying you have to be great at Kung Fu or anything, but Bruce Lee said he doesn't fear the person that knows, doesn't fear someone that's tried 10,000 things. He fears someone that's tried something 10,000 times. And what I found is that once you've done something a few times, you get pretty good at it. And it's amazing just how comfortable you feel. Never expect it to work 100% of the time, but if it's working 50, 80% of the time, it's easy. It is really easy. Right. Oh gosh, very final one. Find out what someone's doing well, understand it, copy it, respect them for what they've done. But if you've got any learning, add to it. Before you know it, you leapfrog over that and you end up going much, much faster. Right, that's me. Sorry it's overrun slightly. It was meant to be an hour, but only finished producing it about a quarter of an hour before the session. So I hope that was okay, and I'll stop sharing. Yes.
Thanks very much, Carl. Well done.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Now you know tomatoes and peppers.
Yeah. I was going to say, pity you didn't get on the bees.
Oh well, yeah. I got chickens and geese and ducks as well, but yeah, that's another story.
Well, the questions are really pouring in. We've got 2 already.
Well, when's he finishing? And yeah.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Go on, I've no idea.
What do you mean by drone trapping, and what do you do that for?
Drone capping.
Did you say trapping or capping?
Yeah, I trap drones. That's partly for my instrumental insemination, but also there's a couple of tricks. One is that if I've got a colony that's really good, I might get some put some foundationless frames in, and they build out and they make a lot of drones, and then I move those drones when they're sealed, or even when they're still in the larval stage, across to another colony, particularly to a colony that I don't like. And what happens then is they may end up being less reluctant to produce their own drones because they've just had a sudden influx. So effectively, I'm trapping them and move them along to other colonies. And those colonies I do like, I try to get them to make a fair few drones. Yeah, sorry if I did another impression. I do trap them for the instrumental insemination, but I didn't do that last year. I'll be doing that there onwards.
It wasn't really covered, but what's your view of under supering in the winter, then over supering in spring?
I will try anything. I can't say that I've had any major benefits or problems with doing it either way. I've under-supered a fair few this year, partly because of the flood risk, to give a bit of extra space, but also I read that bees will actually form a nice cluster under their brood box if you just give them an empty brood box underneath, and I tried that as well. I can't say it works, but or it doesn't work. All I would say is have a go and try to spot the difference. If it works for you and your bees, perfect. If not, don't do it again.
Right, this one might be quite difficult, but I'll ask the question anyway. Can you provide dimensions for your homemade WBC surrounds for national hives? They look terrific.
Okay, well, the easy dimension is that the actual box shape on the outside is 60 centimeters by 60, and that makes it that you can fit a normal national box, which is 46 by 46 inside, quite safely. So if you make them 60 by 60, that's fine. The only other trick is the angle of the wood is at 8 degrees, and just cut that, screw them together. It takes minutes. You end up with a WBC hive. I can send photos if people want, and you can.
I was thinking the width of the wood and the thickness of it makes a difference too, doesn't it?
Yeah, pallet wood is pretty much all the same width. Yeah. It's about between 3/4 of an inch and an inch, but there's enough space to avoid the national hive and to get your fingers inside.
Yeah. Can you show the internal design of a national box made from scaffolding planks? Presumably standard size, is it?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, here's the scaffolding plank. And what I do is cut a slot out, oops, where are we, like that. And then the frame sits in, I can't hold it well, but like that, and you end up with your 8mm gap. That's it.
Okay.
It's no science to it. It's really simple. I think this is 20 by 12, I think. But again, just play. All you need to do is protect the bee space of ideally around about 8mm, and the dimensions present themselves to you then.
Okay. Several questions. People ask the same question here, or a similar question.
Right.
Do you actually use foundation on your homemade frames?
No, but I do use normal Hoffman frames and normal Hoffman foundation. The reason being, if I wanted to give the frames to somebody else, that's sometimes all they can cope with. So I don't have a problem with my own frames being completely bare. I used to paint the lollipop sticks with wax, but lots of times I either didn't have time or couldn't be bothered, and they still drew them out. Once they've been drawn out once, it's so easy. I mean, you just let them do what they do, and then when the comb is all dirty, you literally just cut it out, but the remnant you leave
back,
at the top. Yeah. Anyway, they just build straight back out from it. So yeah, it's easier than you think. Actually, the bees just get on with it.
Several questions of a similar type about the pallet wood. One person says here, most pallets are treated. Do you use them for honey?
Oh, right. All pallets are treated. There are two forms of treatment. There's one which involves bromide, a chemical. That was made illegal in the UK in 2010. And you'll see on every pallet a burn mark with some numbers and letters on. And there's two letters you need to look out for. HT means it's heat treated, and all they do nowadays is they heat the wood up to 80 degrees centigrade, and that kills the eggs and larvae and bugs and things in the wood, so they're safe for all bees basically.
Oh, there's a good tip for everyone.
Yeah, so HT, heat treated. I collect a lot of pallets, sometimes up to 6 a week, and I've been doing that for many years. I cannot find a bromide treated pallet. They're not legal in the UK, and no pallets are 10 years old. I actually get my pallet from a company that has food delivered on it, and by default, they're all new. They're all food grade, which is just heat treated, and they throw them away after the first use. So they're perfect for me. Yeah.
Okay, somebody's asked, what is the life expectancy of the pallet wood? I suppose it depends how wet it gets for a start, does it?
Yeah, it's there's a couple of tricks around that. If you put it inside a WBC, it's indefinite because you don't need to treat it in any way, and the moisture from the bees, the sort of water vapor, can seep into the wood and out the other side, and that works very well. My oldest ones are certainly 15 years, and I've never had to replace them for being rotten. If you are putting the pallet wood on the outside, what I do is I go over it with a torch, a flame torch. Partly it brings out the patina of the wood, but then there's a water-based sort of wood protector, which is a repellent, which is able to be used on what's the word, picnic benches and the like, where you have foodstuffs. So it's food safe, but that's only on the outside side, and that just acts as a water repellent. I've not found a problem, certainly in 10 years. I can't see how it would be any different from a normal pine or spruce type brew box or super anyway. It's the same material.
Okay, somebody asked here, do you have a new queen each year?
No. If I've had a perfect world, the queens I would select to rear from, I would know them for 2 or 3 years at least, so I understand them, and I would have several experiences of what the offspring would be like. That would be my perfect world. So, but what if I'm breeding quickly, then I can breed multiple generations in 1 year. I took a bit of time out from that just recently. I got distracted with something else going along, so I'm sort of restarting it all. But I don't replace. I've no need to replace. I mean, they don't get bad-tempered. If they are bad-tempered, I can move them to another location. But I can actually just cull the queen and allow a new queen to be formed from that colony.
Which is a question almost somebody's just asked.
Oh,
You
okay.
said you don't like killing your bad queen.
No.
What do you do then when they're unsuitable?
I give them away. No.
Yeah, to somebody you don't like. Yeah, I know.
I've got bees on corporate premises, on places for people with special needs at schools, and that these need gentle bees there because, like I said, a duty of care. I've got quite a few bees on farms, and these farms are out in the middle of nowhere. It may be in cattle country, and if anything, I don't mind if they're pretty defensive because I know that wasps and mice and woodpeckers will have a go at them. So if they can give a little bit of a go at those, so be it. But yes, it's option Z for me to cull, although it should be option A if I was trying to be mercenary.
Yeah. And I think we'll take this as the last one. What do you use for roofing material?
Pallet wood. I just use pallet wood again. None of my roofs are flat. One of the things I looked at trying to again, I don't want to criticize too much, but when I looked at a national roof and it's flat and it's got metal on it, I found that metal amplifies the hot and the cold. In the summer, it's really hot and my cats sleep on top of the hives. In the winter, it's freezing cold and water condenses on the underside of the metal and it causes all sorts of condensation on the inside. So my roofs are pallet wood and they're gabled, I guess, isn't it? With just some slats overlapping. And the wood goes over the edge so that I don't have water running down the side of the hive. It covers plenty forward, best part of 2 inches or 5 centimeters, so that I don't have it dripping around the entrance, and that works very well. It's nice and heavy as well. I see lots of people with bricks on the roofs, and thought, rather than keep lifting a brick off or something, if I just have a slightly heavier roof. So making it out of pallet wood works very well.
Okay, we will take this as the last one. Okay. Did I miss a bit about varroa control, or as I hope, you're raising varroa-resistant bees?
In fact, all of my bees have been without varroa treatment for at least 3 years. It doesn't mean they're varroa free. It means that they're resilient to it, so they're coping with it. And it's a careful balance. They tolerate the varroa, but they don't allow the varroa to go out of control. A couple of times I've intervened, and the reason being was it was getting the better of them, and they were starting to show deformed wing virus, which it's a slippery slope after that. But I think I'm lucky. My bees are locally adapted. They may have quite a lot of the Apis mellifera mellifera genes in them, but they tend to have a brood break over the winter and a brood break over the dearth in the summer. The June gap, and the varroa just don't like that because they need the regular supply of open cells to sort of lay their eggs in. I think just as a final point on that, because my bees aren't as prolific as others, the varroa doesn't have such a field day with just so many larvae to lay eggs on. Maybe that just helps keep it under control. But touch wood, I can't say it's going to work every time, but I hope eventually that we all put our bees under a bit of stress, and that way they can start to learn the behaviors of having to deal with varroa.
Okay, Carl. Well, thanks very much for a really good talk. For a very very much different than we
Yeah,
normally get.
sorry. Yeah.
No, absolutely no trouble at all. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening. And